All right, welcome to the Florida Folk Show podcast Zoom. Today we are talking with Mac Martin from Arcadia, Florida. He's an expert in land and real estate, and he's also one of our greatest Florida folk singer-songwriters. And Mac, when he was growing up in his early days of his career as a working man, he worked for Ben Hill Griffin, the famous citrus king of Florida, who passed away recently at the age of 78 at his home in Frostproof, Florida. Now, Ben was born in Lake Wales, so he lived his entire life in Polk County, Florida, and that's quite an accomplishment. And but talk about accomplishments. It would take me an hour of straight reading to just give you an idea of all the boards that he served on in agriculture and citrus and pursuits, and also the awards he's been given, and just incredible. He's his father, I guess, was the Ben Hill Griffin that the Florida Field is named after, the Gators Stadium up there in Gainesville. And Ben Hill himself is in all the Hall of Fames: Florida Citrus Hall of Fame, the Council of the 100, the Florida Land Council. He was the chairman. There are roads named after him, but I'll let Mac tell you about him. He's going to give us a kind of a personal look. He spent a lot of time with Ben Hill, and Ben Hill took him under his wing there for a while and taught him what the world was all about, the world of Florida. And it's sad that we lost another great cracker icon, but his memory will be with us forever. Here's Mac Martin. Now, what's that painting up by your head?
That's a Galabri.
What's the name of it?
It's called Nature's Warning, Enemy Approaching, and it's got these Seminoles that are hiding in the bushes, and these birds are like being flushed out of the swamp because there's soldiers. Right. But I call it customers approaching.
Well, I remember that one. I've got one here too about the Shakespearean opera company that was going down, leaving St. Augustine, going somewhere else, and they were attacked by the Seminoles who thought they were carrying gunpowder, and they opened it up, and that's where they got all their turbans and flowing robes, and pretty soon they had that began that culture of dress.
Yeah, I saw. I'm familiar with that painting, but
I appreciate you taking the time away from your busy business there, the Land Panther, and we want to discuss a recent icon of Florida that passed away, Ben Hill Griffin III, who I guess just as much of an icon as his father, Ben Hill Griffin Jr. And these guys, known far and wide, they're in every Hall of Fame that you can imagine having to do with agriculture, particularly citrus in the state of Florida. And I know that you knew Ben Hill III. You were quite close with him. Can you tell us that story and give us some insight into what kind of guy he was?
Well, yeah, Pete, I appreciate you asking me to talk about my friend, and he Ben Hill Griffin III. Somebody told me a long time ago that it's really hard to make a fortune and create an empire, but it's harder to keep it. And one of the things that Ben Hill Griffin Jr. Did was he built an empire of citrus, cattle, banking, fertilizer, fresh fruit, country club, and his son Ben Hill Griffin III inherited that along with his siblings, And not only did they keep the huge fortune and successful business, but they grew it into a phenomenal, very prosperous and in a lot of ways beneficial business. I mean, all of the things that the Griffin family were involved with had a benefit overall for the public. I mean, sure, they made a living and did very well and for themselves personally, but they employed hundreds of people, even thousands of people. They created thousands of jobs over the years, and the legacy just continues to grow. But I met Ben Hill. I was working as a assistant personnel manager at a little factory in Arcadia, Florida, back in the early '90s, and it was a transformer manufacturer, the gray power, a transformer. The cans you see hanging on the power poles. We manufactured those, and I was in charge of. I was like the assistant personnel guy. I'd do safety training sessions and some workers' comp accident investigations and employee relations type things. And the company was going to close, and I was going to be out of a job. In fact, my last job at that little company was laying everybody off, and then I had to lay myself off. And in that process, I started looking for another job, and I was calling around to people, and I called the gentleman that was a friend of ours, my parents, and I'm looking for work, and it was a citrus company in town called Orange Co. in Arcadia. I live in Arcadia, and there was a big citrus company in the area called Orange Co. and had 42,000 acres of contiguous citrus groves, a big, big grove. You could see it from space satellites, that big. But anyway, Mr. Glenn Thomas worked out there. I called Mr. Thomas, said, "Do you have any jobs?" And at the time, Ben Hill Griffin Incorporated owned Orange Co. So one thing led to another. I had a little idea, but I got a call to have an interview for a job with Ben Hill Griffin himself. And so I went up to the headquarters in Frostproof, and the next thing I know, I was being offered a job as their corporate safety director. And it didn't take me long to learn that Ben Hill Griffin owned all these ranches and groves and a country club and a fertilizer plant. He also owned Alico, which is a huge company down in the Fort Myers area, which soon became the location of Florida Gulf Coast University. And so I got really a very lucky job opportunity, and I was there for a couple of years, and I saw Ben Hill almost every day for 2 years.
What kind of guy was he? Tell us about him.
He was just when he walks in the room, everybody knew he was in the room. He commanded your attention, but he engaged you. I mean, he didn't just walk by and not recognize you or no, he knew you. He would engage you. He'd ask you how you're doing. He was a very personable person. He inspired that in everybody around him. And when I met him, and I'm not saying anything that is not known to everybody, but he liked to have a good time. He was a jet setter. He had Ben Hill Griffin Stadium is the name of the stadium at the University of Florida.
The Swamp.
The Swamp.
That was named after Ben Hill Griffin Jr.
Right. But But Ben, the family had a box where they entertained, and he just loved to do that stuff. And he played golf, he'd hunt, he'd fish, but all the time he's working and taking care of the company as well. But so when I met him, he was in the prime of owning all of these companies and being in charge of all these boards. I read that he was on the board of directors for SunTrust. I read his obituary this morning. And there's so much more that he did. But just on a personal note, he was, I was in my early 30s. I guess I'm 61 now, but I can't believe it. But, this was in 1992. And so I was just kind of, I'd had a couple of jobs, and I was working my way up the corporate ladder, so to speak. And so I got into Ben Hill Griffin Incorporated. It was a big company. I mean, it was big. And I was in charge of all the employee safety, how to handle chemicals and how to be safe, equipment safety. Anyway, I'd have some industrial experience with that stuff. But a couple of things was I was still young, I was a kid basically. But he would walk through the office in the morning and throw me his keys to his Jeep, and I'd go put gas in it. He'd say, "Hey, go put gas in my car." So I'd go over to the gas pumps and put gas in the car. But Ben Hill Griffin, the company is steeped in a lot of traditions and things that they do on a regular basis.
Did you like make believe you were Ben Hill while you're driving that Jeep? Did you ever do that?
No, but I could
imagine how it felt to be Ben Hill Griffin.
Yeah. It just everybody loved him.
All the people got off the highway as the Jeep was coming up.
Well, the thing is that back in the early 90s, it was the Jeep Grand Cherokee. It had the wooden sides on it,
panels,
panels, and it was a decked out Jeep, and they were going to quit making them. So he bought one and had it stored in the warehouse, wrapped in shrink wrap, a brand new wrapped in shrink wrap, stored in the
Jeep Woody.
Yeah, that's right. He had one that when the one he was driving wore out, he wanted another one, and he bought it and wrapped it in shrink wrap and stored it back underneath some of the racks in the warehouse. And
he was known as quite the charitable benefactor to so many places. I heard that he gave every church, I think in Frostproof, a big donation, everyone at Christmas time. For
there was
years and years.
Whenever he was in the office, there was just a constant stream of people coming to visit him and ask him for their business or asking him for donations. You can imagine, it was just a constant stream of people coming in the office and going out of the office. And then he'd have a few meetings, and then he'd go to the club for lunch, and he'd come back, and or he would go to the Avon Park Airport and get in his helicopter to go look at the ranches or the groves. He was on the move. I mean, he never stopped. But he was just a really also a regular person. I remember before I was hired as part of the interview process, he invited my wife and I to come to his home with his, and have supper. And the dinner was in his kitchen at a little kitchenette table, and we had ham and lima beans and cornbread, and iced tea. It was just very simple meal, and he had a nice home, but it wasn't anything really enormous or anything. It's just a nice home on a lake up in Frostproof. Another thing, and it was just an enjoyable night. Another kind of interesting thing is that he would have like a Christmas gathering, and Steve Spurrier would come. They were great friends with Steve Spurrier, and he just had all these amazing people that, there are countless people that he was very involved in politics. So,
many of his descendants were in the House or the Senate. His niece, great niece, I guess, Catherine Harris, was the Secretary of State.
When I started with Ben Hill's company, what was to become Senator J.D. Alexander was a department manager for Alico and a grove manager for Ben Hill. He kind of had a split role. But at the time, I came in as the director of safety on a level. I had I had some to-doings with JD's department. I'd have to go in and say, JD, we got to tighten up on our tractor safety. You got to make sure the guards are on, and that kind of stuff. And then Baxter Troutman, who was also a state representative who ran for Commissioner of Agriculture, was starting in his career at the time. He's a grandson of Ben Hill Griffin Jr. And he's a nephew of Ben Hill III. So there's, the whole family is, has a lot of success stories and are really great people in the state of Florida.
I first ran into him in the early days of the Florida Panther program when I was on the Florida Panther Technical Advisory Council to the governor. And that was back in the late 70s. And there was, at the time, only signs all over the swamp, only 30 remain, Florida Panthers, and Alico was there way back then. And they had a little office in a fire tower, I think it was, over in near a fire tower on State Road 29 in the Devil's Garden part of Florida, and named for Sam Jones, the old Seminole warrior that led the Indians into Big Cypress along a trail, which was that state road that goes from Clewiston all the way down to Big Cypress Reservation. And so they had I think by the 90s, they had tried everything they could with the Florida Panther. They tried the controversial captive breeding, and it became apparent that habitat loss was one of the main reasons. And encroachment of people and cars and things that killed panthers, the other reason that the animal was going down. And in the 90s, the early 90s, the legislature decided that we needed another university in Florida. And they left it up to the Board of Regents to decide. And Ben Hill Griffin had, I think, 900 acres, something like that, over there outside of Fort Myers. And he agreed to donate land. Miami wanted it. Jacksonville wanted it. There's 6 or 7 places in the state that had, but nobody had the land. They would have had to go out and buy the land, but here he was giving the land out. And of course, a lot of the Panther people were upset because it was Panther habitat. And so there was a historic meeting one day in September that the Ben Hill, I don't think, was at the meeting, but his lawyers were there. And Dave Mayer was there, who was working for Ben Hill at the time. He used to be the head of the Game Commission's Panther operation, and also who else was there? I'm trying to think. Anyway, Bob Graham was there, and Bob Graham. It was a closed door meeting. Nobody made a recording or anything else, and you had to trust Bob Graham. He was one of our greatest environmental governors, and they decided to go ahead and give that land. And the Fish and Wildlife Service was going to sign off on it, and to give that land to the Board of Regents to establish what would become Florida Gulf Coast University. I think at the time, the 10th or 11th university in the state. And so, among some of the Panther people, Ben Hill Griffin, they didn't like him because of that, And then at the same time, you had to realize that that land that he gave them was basically swamp. I don't know what he was going to do with it anyway, but what happened was they were able to build a university, and of course, it filled in. Development surrounded that university out there. It's a major university now, and went all the way to the the March Madness of the college football.
Basketball. What do they call it? Dunk City.
Yeah, Dunk City. Yeah, that was their nickname. Yeah. So he's. I wonder if you did you ever talk to him, or did he ever have any reaction to environmental things happening? I mean, they investigated them.
I was never. Ben Hill and I got invited to his 75th birthday party. Which was it was amazing that somebody like me would get invited to that event. But it was really. But I've never, we never really had any real serious discussions about anything like that. Honestly, I think Ben Hill had an old guitar, and he had me run out and try to find him some new strings for his guitar one day. And I went back up into his office and I was stringing his guitar, and that's more of the kind of relationship that I had with Ben Hill. He knew that I had a job to do with the company, but we enjoyed our company really just it was, I'm not kidding. It was more of a friendship than he was my boss, It was just that kind of thing. And, I didn't spend a lot of time with him, but when I saw him, he came to, he wrote a big check for the Arcadia Rodeo, the new stadium. And when he was there at the presentation and the groundbreaking, I was on some of the fundraising for that stadium as well. And, it's just like seeing an old friend, it's like, hey, how you doing? Doing great. How's the family? That kind of thing. Of course, he's a little bit older. I think he's 78. So he was more of a big, a big brother figure to me.
Yeah.
Or, uncle kind of thing, Well,
I just didn't want to leave the wrong impression, because as it is right now, the Florida Panther today is healthier than it's ever been. There's several hundred.
That's good to hear you say that.
There's a lot more protective land that the state has acquired and the federal government has acquired since then, and they're being killed on the highway. Not this year, but before the COVID, they were getting killed regularly on the highway because they had overpopulated the range that they have, and I know that they tried to repopulate the animal up in North Florida and other places. So, and this university is one of the most successful universities in the state, and so it may have been a good trade-off, but for some of the people, and they looked upon Alico as the enemy, when really they were investigated many times. They did a clean operation. They kept good grows. They didn't, oh, that's right. the Devil's Garden, Alico sold 10,684 acres to the state this year, and they're creating a panther preserve right there in that Devil's Garden area that I was talking about earlier. So that came before Ben Hill Griffin died. Yeah. So
my recollections about Ben Hill are his friendliness, his generosity, and his concern for others. And it's really remarkable. The guy with that kind of organization and those type of resources would be, a people person, a true people person. And he really was.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your taking the time. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about it? I guess they're having a private, they did have or having a private ceremony because of the COVID. And I imagine his final resting place will be certainly probably in the Frostproof area. And
no, I just think that I'm really happy that you're remembering Ben Hill Griffin III in the way you are on your podcast, Pete. I've listened to your podcasts and I enjoy them very much. And I wish you the best and future success with it. And you're doing a great service for the state of Florida and Florida history by your Florida Folk podcast. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mac Martin.
Bye.
See you down the line.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.